foreign terrorist organization is a designation for non-United States-based organizations deemed by the United States Secretary of State, in accordance with Section 219 of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, to be involved in what U.S. authorities define as terrorist activities. Most of the organizations on the list are Islamist extremist groups, nationalist, separatist groups or Marxist militant groups. The Department of State, along with the Treasury Department, also has the authority to designate individuals and entities as subject to counter-terrorism sanctions according to Executive Order 13224. The Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control maintains a separate list of such individuals and entities. Identification of candidates. The Office of the Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism in the U.S. State Department continually monitors the activities of groups it does not support, active around the world considered potentially terrorist, to identify targets for designation. When reviewing potential targets, SCT looks not only at the actual attacks that a group has carried out, but also at whether the group has engaged in planning and preparations for possible future acts of violence or retains the capability and intent to carry out such acts. Designation process. Once a target is identified, the Office of the Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism prepares a detailed administrative record, which is a compilation of information, typically including both classified and open sources information, demonstrating that the statutory criteria for designation have been satisfied. If the Secretary of State, in consultation with the Attorney General and the Secretary of the Treasury, decides to make the designation, the United States Congress is notified of the Secretary's intent to designate the organization and given 7 days to review the designation, as the INA requires. Upon the expiration of the 7-day waiting period, notice of the designation is published in the Federal Register, at which point the designation takes effect. An organization designated as an FDO may seek judicial review of the designation in the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit not later than 30 days after the designation is published in the Federal Register. Under the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004, the FDO may file a petition for revocation 2 years after the designation date or 2 years after the determination date on its most recent petition for revocation. In order to provide a basis for revocation, the petitioning FDO must provide evidence that the circumstances forming the basis for the designation are sufficiently different as to warrant revocation. If no such review has been conducted during a 5-year period with respect to a designation, then the Secretary of State is required to review the designation to determine whether revocation would be appropriate. The procedural requirements for designating an organization as an FDO also apply to any redesignation of that organization. The Secretary of State may revoke a designation or redesignation at any time upon a finding that the circumstances that were the basis for the designation or redesignation have changed in such a manner as to warrant revocation, or that the national security of the United States warrants a revocation. The same procedural requirements apply to revocations made by the Secretary of State as apply to designations or redesignations. A designation may also be revoked by an act of Congress, or set aside by a court order. Legal criteria for designation. It must be a foreign organization. The organization must engage in terrorist activity, as defined in Section 212 of the INA, *terrorism, as defined in Section 140 of the Foreign Relations Authorization Act, fiscal years 1988 and 1989, or retain the capability and intent to engage in terrorist activity or terrorism. The organization's terrorist terrorist activity or terrorism threaten the security of U.S. nationals or the national security of the United States. Legal ramifications of designation. It is unlawful for a person in the United States or subject to the jurisdiction of the United States to knowingly provide material support or resources to a designated FDO, as currency, a monetary instrument, of financial securities, financial services, lodging, training, expert advice or assistance, safe houses, false documentation or identification, communications equipment, facilities, weapons, lethal substances, explosives, personnel, transportation, and other physical assets, except medicine or religious materials. Quote, closing parenthesis. Representatives and members of a designated FDO, if they are aliens, are inadmissible to and, in certain circumstances, removable from the United States. 1227. Any U.S. financial institution that becomes aware that it has possession of a control over funds in which a designated FDO or its agent has an interest, must retain possession of a control over the funds and report the funds to the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Other effects of designation. The U.S. Department of State lists the following items as additional considered beneficial effects of designation: supports efforts to curb terrorism financing and to encourage other nations to do the same, stigmatizes and isolates designated terrorist organizations internationally, deters donations or contributions to and economic transactions with named organizations, heightens public awareness and knowledge of terrorist organizations, signals to other governments U.S. concern about named organizations. Official designation of a group as a foreign terrorist organization also triggers more robust means of combat under the Authorization for Use of Military Force Act. Groups designated as foreign terrorist organizations. List is current as of May 28, 2016. Organized by region and country of origin. Delisted foreign terrorist organizations. The following groups have been removed from the State Department list as of December 9, 2015. Criticism. The Center for Humanitarian Dialogue noted in a 2006 report that third parties play no role in the designation process, and that designated organizations only learn of the designation once it has occurred, with no chance of rebuttal. Listed entities may request reviews or challenge the listing in court, but success is limited. In April 2014, Noam Chomsky criticized the list, saying, "Why should we even take the terrorist list seriously? What's the terrorist list? The executive branch of the government simply determines you're a terrorist. I put you on the list. No review, no judicial review, no defense. It's just an executive act of an authoritarian state. Why should the state have the right to determine unilaterally who's a terrorist? Do they have that right? No, they don't." Controversies. The 2012 delisting of Mujahideen-e-Khalq was supported by numerous U.S. lawmakers and defense and foreign policy officials, but was criticized by the National Iranian-American Council. The Treasury Department investigated allegations that payments to former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell, on behalf of his lobbying for the MEK, had violated the legal ban on material support for an FDO. In May 2014, Republican lawmakers criticized Hillary Clinton's decision during her tenure as United States Secretary of State to not designate Boko Haram as an FDO. Clinton's concern was that the designation would give what was seen as a domestic group international attention. John Kerry added the group and its offshoot Ansaru to the list in November 2013. In August 2014, the Christian Science Monitor reported that U.S. military coordination with Kurdish forces in Iraq, including elements of the PKK, seemed to be in violation of the ban on assistance to a designated FDO.